Hi everyone, I'm Adam Chwiłkowski, and today with my colleague Adrian Makowski, we will present you creating easygoing code. We are working at Roche, that's why we are so blue today, but anyway, you can find outside the hall the company box. You are welcome to ask any questions, so yeah, feel free. Our agenda looks very simply. We will cover two main topics. I will cover topics regarding CSS architecture and talk about methodologies and naming convention and try to sell you any UI guidelines and quality tools as a good practices. My colleague.
I will talk about general code approach rules, basic architecture principles, and test-driven approach.
Yep, so have fun. So let me start from CSS architecture. Anyway, why we should care about CSS architecture? The main reason is that currently we have a hard job as a front-end developers. There are many browsers on many devices, which is not easy to handle. As an example, I can show you this picture. I don't know how many of us have that kind of market to cover, but there is an issue and challenges. And the fact is that frontends are getting more complex. That's the fact. And teams, websites, any web applications are getting bigger. There's high demand for rapid delivery, easy maintainability, and possibility to scale. So yeah, it's really hard on the market. As an example, I can show you also one of our application, which is a modal dialog. You can imagine how good CSS architecture can help us to make the changes and change requests easier and make the structure scalable. But to be honest, you truly want to avoid that kind of situation where you are changing some components and this change destroy your other components. We definitely want to avoid that, and that's why CSS architecture is really important. But you can just say, okay, my code is working, why should I care? The second reason is also important. Imagine this boxer that's trying to enter the ring. It's so hard for him. The same we have in our project. So let's try to keep the entry level as low as possible, and using good goals in our CSS architecture is the way. So let me just start and say how we should make this CSS. So the goals of good CSS are definitely for CSS architecture are predictable, reusable, maintainable, and scalable. But what does it mean? So predictable means your rules behave as you would expect it. So, okay, reusable means you are able to build new components quickly from existing parts. Maintainable means that adding component A should not break component B. And scalable means that it's easily approachable without requiring an enormous learning curve. Yep, that's in theory, but how to achieve that in a practical way? So today I will just show you one approach and one naming convention and kind of meta framework for keeping the files very structural. So let me start from OOCSS, and I'll just ask a question. How many of us have heard about OOCSS? That's cool, that's nice. So generally it's about creating abstraction, finding the patterns. What OOCSS stands for Object-Oriented CSS. It came from Nicole Sullivan, and it's just approach of writing reusable CSS that is fast, scalable, and maintainable. Going this approach means that we should use more HTML classes in our markup. That's the fact, and I totally recommend to do that. But why? Because HTML classes have no effects on semantics. That's a myth. So, moreover, they are not unclean, and generally they are not bad. So, why not use them? But using too much HTML classes give you classicities. I don't know. Do you know this front-end development disease? This is really hard to deal with. So, use it wisely. I would recommend like 5, maximum 6 HTML classes per element. And as an example, I can show you those two examples. So how the first one can be okay, but the second not. So the cost of clean HTML is a messy CSS. And in this case, I will totally agree with Harry Robert, who said that stop putting all your complexity in your CSS. Because the reason is simply that HTML is easy to read, easy to maintain, and CSS is costly. I totally agree with that. So to sum up this old CSS, it's just an approach. I recommend to read about more about in a Nicole Sullivan web page, but it's about just creating abstraction, finding design patterns in a layout, and using more HTML classes. The next thing that I want to talk about is BAM naming convention, which stands with acronym is BAM. How many of you have heard about BAM? Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So BAM stands for block element modifier. It's also it's much more than naming convention. It stands for whole framework bring by Yandex, a Russian company, but it's not the topic for today's presentation. But anyway, it helps us to provide a good object-oriented structure with a familiar terminology and simplicity. And to show you this practice, B stands for block. It's just a root of component. E stands for element. It's just component part of the block, and modifier is a variant or extension of the block. As you can see in this in below example, it's just like div with HTML class block, also with the extension modifier block modifier, double dash, and it's have only one element, which is block element as a span. We can use easily BAM or trying to find any blocks in our designs, layouts. As you can see, there are many different blocks to find, like authorization block, menu block, logo block, or search block. And for instance, the search block can have elements like search input or search button. So simply, I totally recommend to try in your projects BAM. It's very useful. The next topic that I want to recommend regarding the CSS architecture is try IT CSS, which stands for inverted triangle CSS. It's same scalable measured architecture for large Euro projects. It's created and recommended by Harry Roberts. It's nothing but just proposal for keeping the files in a separate layers. Like going from the top to the bottom, we have inverted triangle. Bam, Captain Obvious. So going from the top, we have the lowest specificity. Going to the bottom, the high specificity. Each layer have different responsibilities. So settings have, like when using preprocessor like less or SAS, we are talking about the red layers. Then we have settings like config, baselines, etc. Tools are for mixing functions. So it's also clear to use. Generic guide just for stuff like normalize or CSS reset, which I do not recommend to use it. A base is generally tags like HTML body, so any base styles. Objects is the place where you put any old CSS, our abstractions and patterns. Components are chunks of UI, so they are just components built based on old CSS and other patterns. And trumps are the utilities, any overrides, so the highest specificity in that case. That's the ICSS. Yeah, it's really worth to check it. Okay, so I've talked about BAM, OCSS, and ICSS, but parallel, I want to recommend any good and some good practices regarding CSS architecture. So it's really good to have any UI guidelines, kind of visual documentation in your application, in your code, because it helps others to reuse quickly your CSS code. As an example, I can name a module like style down or KSS, or there are many other to use on the GitHub. So yeah. Another good practices is to have good quality code quality tools like CSS Lint. Because of cross-functional teams, it really helps you to detect bug practices using as Lint plugin or whatever. And you can just agree in your team the rules that you want to follow and have a look on it. Yeah, so just track it. And the last one, I would recommend to use any tools that measure your CSS statics. The one I like is style stats, because they just easily find any problematic patterns, like number of rules, selectors, simplicity factor in %. So it's really worth to have it just to watch out for your CSS code and markup. Okay.
Okay. So Let's think for a moment that programming is cooking and try to find the similarities. So maybe this quote from Richard Stallman, Free Speech Conference, will help you. He wanted us to treat software programs as cooking recipes. And that's mainly because they both provide useful step-by-step instructions how to solve a given task, and they should be easily modified. They are also shareable. Okay, so what's cooking today? I will tell you about general principles I follow, the basic ones, architecture patterns I use, also the basic ones, and really basic introduction to test-driven approach. So architecture rule number 1 is actually outside of our world. It's something that Albert Einstein said, that your solutions should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. That means they should be simple, but they also have to kept in check with the conditions of the problem. In practice, for me, it means that you don't necessarily need to be a keyboard cowboy. If you know JavaScript well, try not to play with the grammar or lexical stuff there, because your code might end up being like this. So if you compare it with this example, the difference is obvious, right? Which one is more readable, more predictable, and maintainable? Rule number 2 is something dictated by common sense. Be pragmatic, search for answers, think and improve. And it's also a disclaimer for my presentation. If anything from my presentation doesn't suit your needs, doesn't solve your problems, simply don't use it. Okay, let's talk about basic architecture principles. Let's talk about single responsibility and open close. Those are 2 rules from Solid. And at the end, let's talk about composition over inheritance. So SRP is a rule invented by Robert C. Martin. I really recommend his book, Clean Code. He said that a class should have only one reason to change. What does it mean? Well, don't repeat his problems. Let's take a look at an example. So there are 3 functions in this class person, but let's focus on the 2 last ones. Validate email function doesn't belong here, because you can validate your emails in many places of your system, but it doesn't have to be necessarily related to person class. And the solution for that is very simple. Just create 2 different classes and gather the same type of behaviors in those classes. So open-close principle, 2 things you need to remember from this principle, that your entities should be open for extension and closed for modification. Let us take a look at this example. This example appends types of questions to the form based on the type parameter passed to the function. So if we have another type, like checkbox or radio, we will need to add another type of ifs here. So the solution is as well very simple here. Just create your question classes or functions outside of this function. Let this function be single responsibility one, and just pass those things and invoke them inside of this function. So favor composition over inheritance. Actually, this is a rule that Bruce Lee would use if he were a programmer. And this is an example that I took from Fun Faction YouTube channel. I strongly recommend you this channel because Matthias is a great guy and he presents things in a really simple manner. So let's take a look at this chain of inheritance. We have 2 abstractions, robot and animal. All robots should drive and all animals should poop, right? Because they are animals. So we can create subclasses out of it, like murder robot, which has kill behavior, and dog that can bark. You can imagine many other things like cat that can meow or something like that. But imagine that with this inheritance chain, someone tell us, please create me a murder robot dog. So how would you create a class that is somewhat a union out of those two abstraction classes? A murder robot dog should drive, should kill, and should bark, but it shouldn't poop because it's a robot. So if you try to make inheritance out of robot and animal, you will encounter a trivial gorilla banana problem. So you want a banana, but you get a banana with a gorilla holding it. That's why we should focus on behaviors. So let's sum it up. Dog is pooper and barker. Murder robot is driver and killer. And murder robot dog is driver, killer, and barker. When you do something like that, you can easily change it to functions and assign it to your newly created class, murder robot dog. This way, you can create your code from many small blocks, and this makes your code programming process really flexible. Okay, but we have our architecture patterns, and how to be sure that we are safe when we are changing something. And this is when test-driven development comes to our rescue. So it consists out of 3 steps: write failing test, implement unit function. And unit is a keyword here because you need to make sure that your function is without side effects. So when you pass 5, for example, a number 5 to this function, it always gets you the same output. It won't be mutable. Okay, and the 3rd step is refactor. I will show you now how to do it in practice and how actually easy it is, because your code without tests is like Iron Man without the suit. So we have collection of animals here, and each animal has name and species properties. You want to create a function that filters those animals for a given species key. So we create this really simple one test, unit test. We expect that filter species function takes 2 arguments, animals and dog, which is our search key, and returns an array of objects, collection, of length 2. And that's it. That's all you need. Then you implement it, which don't have to be good or clean. We can make it later. And after that, while we have this test, and we know that this test shows us what is right and what is wrong, we can refactor it to this state. So this is that easy. Okay, so summing it up. Be pragmatic. Apply correct solution for a given problem. Simplify your code wherever possible. Use architecture patterns. And what I mean by that, you don't have to, if you're a beginner, you don't have to use them all at once. You can do that step by step. Just try one pattern, practice with it, experience the power of it. And use unit tests to keep your work in check. It's really easy. And it's really fast. So, Adam, back to you.
Thank you, Roger. Anyway, I just want to sum up my part regarding CSS architecture. So, as I said, create abstractions, try to find patterns in your layout designs. Definitely go with OOCSS approach. Use BEM naming convention to keep the specificity low and code readability high. And really, it's worth to try ITSSS, especially in Raj UI projects, to keep scalable managed CSS architecture, especially when you work in a cross-functional team. So, yeah, that's 3 main points that I want to cover in CSS architecture goals.
Okay, so any questions? Thank you.